How's everybody doing on this good Sunday? This is the Proof in the Pudding podcast show, and I go by the name of Sion 919. I'm excited about today's show. We got trauma episode number 8, and the topic is from victim to abuser. And I'm sitting here, she's a regular on the show at this point right now. Psychoeducational therapist Natalie Collier. How you feeling? How was your week?
Man, I'm feeling great. I was just telling you, went to the beach yesterday, so super relaxed.
Right.
Week's been good. Okay, I ain't got no complaints. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited about the show right here, victim to
Yes.
abusers, because like a lot of times it's like, what we went through. They used to
Mhm.
bully us. A lot of cops right now used to get picked on in school. Now they're
Right.
abusing their authority, and now
Yes.
they become the victimizer.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a
And
cycle.
and and it's so interesting that we are really doing this topic because I know we've talked about so many different things over the course of these 8 episodes. So some of this will seem for some people who've been following it may hear me say some things that kind of sound a little repetitive, but I'm
Right,
kind of trying to work everybody up for the second part of our segment because this is going to be a 2-part segment
right.
talking about abusers, but I kind of wanted to give a really good overview before we actually start breaking it down. That also gives people an opportunity if they want to submit questions or thoughts prior to the second segment, they're able to do so that we can make sure that we do answer those questions in the next part of the segment.
That'd be dope right there. So we'll definitely put that out and we'll start promoting that as well. And then
Right.
I was thinking, even down the road, we might sometimes have special guests that might pop in and ask a question or two.
That'd be great.
Just to add that organic feel, so they actually be able to ask their questions and you can talk to them right there on the spot.
And I know we've gotten more requests to do, well, at least I have, and people have been messaging me. I've gotten some, more requests about, are we going to talk more about relationships? And I
Right.
said, maybe when we wrap the trauma series, if it's something that continues to get a lot of, desire, that maybe we could work into a relationship series since it seems to be a big thing for everybody right now. But I think what'll be cool is understanding all the trauma and then being able to now move into a different series,
Right.
it may be able to help some people really understand what we'll be talking about in relationships as we break that down, now that people have an understanding of mental health issues and trauma and what to really look out for moving forward in dating and relationships and so forth, even parenting and just things like that.
That makes sense right there, because you want to go in healthy so that you can
Yeah.
have a healthy relationship. So it's like we coming out of the trauma, we done dealt with that. Now we can live our best lives the right way.
And trauma and mental health is one of those things that you could talk about forever, like you
Right.
you really could, because there's still a lot of things that we don't know. We know that we can't study the brain the way that we'd like to, because when people die the brain no longer works, so you're not
Right.
going to be able to get those intricate things that you're looking for. And then when a person is living, you can only study that so far,
Right.
so a lot of this is what we see as repetition and commonalities, and that's how we are kind of able to make some of the case studies that have the validity the way they do, is we're assessing patterns
Right.
and things of that nature. So before we start, I always like to tell everyone we don't go out our way to offend anyone.
Right.
So if something is said on the show that kind of strikes a nerve, we're not doing it intentionally. I never go out my way to intentionally offend someone, but if you are offended, we do apologize. But
Right.
again, I think that becomes a personal issue. I'm also not drinking. I'm want to let everybody know that now. I would never drink on camera. I don't drink, so I just got a little bit of this cran blackberry by Ocean Spray. Is the most amazing juice on the planet. I'm just giving a
Right.
nice little promotion for that.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with drinking a good juice out of a nice wine glass. So,
Right.
and I guess now we'll just jump right into it. So,
Okay. Right.
we know that when we talked about trauma before, we talked about it being, something that can happen directly to us,
Right.
and it is something that can be passed down to us. We have the ability to traumatize in so many different ways,
Right.
and we know that childhood trauma affects us differently than adult trauma. And, you know, we're not really going to talk about psychopathology today, but that's something that people are curious about. We could definitely talk more about that. But we know psychopaths are kind of hardwired very differently. That can also be from trauma,
Right.
but there's so many other layers that are attached to that just besides trauma. So I won't really dive too heavy into that.
Right.
But we do know that trauma does have the ability to alter our perception. It has the ability to change, and when I say perception, just our outlook on things. And we know that as individuals, we all have different perceptions because of our upbringing, peers, things that were influenced when we were younger. And the reason that childhood age is so crucial is because children are like sponges.
Right.
We soak up everything, because we're in that stage where we're constantly learning, you know. And we use you hear people use the phrase, be childlike when you come to Christ.
Right.
You know, you're born again. You're like a baby in Christ because you're zealous for that. So you're constantly soaking up that information because you're craving to learn.
Right.
So children are the same way. So that's why it's so important for us as adults, you know, moving forward, if we're not healthy, to get healthy, because the things that they experience is going to shape who they're going to become.
Right. Right.
And so when we talk about, you know, going from victim to abuser, we do know that everyone that's been victimized is not an abuser.
Right.
You know, so just because somebody was sexually assaulted doesn't mean that they're going to turn around and sexually assault somebody else. Someone who, you know, watched their father, you know, beat their mother is not necessarily going to be a woman beater himself.
Right.
But there are things that children learn that can shape the outcome of which way they're going to swing. And that also has a factor of what the support system looks out beyond just that. You know, you get those kids that, you know, maybe they're one way with their peers, but when they're around adults, they're completely another way.
Wow.
So sometimes you have that. So, you know, that well-roundedness is what we're really shooting for, you know, that I try to instill in all people is to be well-rounded. You need that because it gives you a balance in your life. So abusers, victims of abuse, a lot of times, you know, what we like to call the deviant learned behavior, right? So deviant learned behavior is a deviant act that is done, that a child witnesses or the victim witnesses. Now they have attached that deviancy to this thing. So we see that a lot when we talk about sexual abuse, right? Sexual abuse is violation and it is a deviant act. So if a child has their first sexual experiences by forcible rape or molestation, what that can do is it teaches them that this act itself, this is what this is supposed to be. So now when they associate sex, if they're never you know, treated for the trauma, right? Because the goal is to treat for the trauma. But if we never treat for the trauma, then that learned deviancy now becomes, okay, this is acceptable.
Right.
This is how it's done. So now that becomes their norm.
Right.
It's the same way when we see people, like we talked about domestic violence. So trauma can be a number of things. And we've talked about that before. It can be verbal, it can be physical, you know, it can be emotional, and it can be mental. Right. So if you're constantly inflicting some level of abuse, you're tearing down what hasn't already had a chance to grow. Wow. So when you're dealing with children, and a lot of times I like to say children because we know that in patterns and studies show that it really starts in childhood. Right. It really is more gripped and affected during childhood than it is in adulthood or even adolescence. We see it more in that malleable age. I like to say between 1 and 5 is very crucial. But if we can even go a little bit further, we could say 1 to 10. We could say 1 to 12.
Right.
You
The
know, some
foundation,
kids
yes.
and some kids can really experience, abuse past that age. But
Wow.
we know that during those stages is the most important time for children to feel protected. So when they're not feeling protected and they're constantly being, I'll use the word accosted because we just kind of want to put all these things into one basket right quick. We want
Right.
to put in verbal, physical, mental, emotional. We just want to throw all that stuff into one basket.
Wow.
So if if a child is constantly accosted, you're stripping away any level of safety, number one. You're taking away their ability to learn empathy, which is very important. I don't like to say, people say, well, I have sympathy for somebody. Be careful with sympathy because sympathy can be a countertransference of that emotion.
Right.
You know, you want to be careful not to take on someone else's emotion, but to empathize means, you know, I understand what you're going through, or I try to understand what you're going through, and I want to be able to let you know that I feel for your situation
Right.
versus trying to take on that emotion and make it personal for yourself. So
Okay.
children kind of learn that balance from their caregivers. This is the first foundation of trust. Parents show that, you can come to me and tell me something. I'm not going to throw that back in your face. I'm not going to, take what you're feeling and make you feel guilty about it.
Right.
Let's have a conversation about those things because we're the navigational guide.
In life, right? For them.
So if you strip someone of all of that and you're accosting them, think about what that's doing to their brain.
Right. Wow. Right. You're kind of
So
working against them, setting them up to fail. Right.
right, because now you're not teaching them those vital things that they need to know about,
Right.
those navigational skills. Because if our first line of defense is our parents, and that's where we get the protection and that's where we get the trust built from. You know what I'm saying? That's the first real relationship that we're going to have in this world.
Wow.
So if we learn that's the safe haven and it's done with love and balance, right? Because our children are going to be children and they're going to, because they don't know everything.
Right.
They're going to do things that, no, you can't do that. You know what I'm saying? There's a punishment for that. And the reason that we want to redirect or punish our children is because we want to rule out what is unacceptable behavior.
Right.
We just want to strip what is unacceptable out of it.
Right. We ain't even doing that. That's it.
Right.
We ain't
We're
even
not,
playing this.
yeah, we're not doing that. And
Right.
some people, say they beat their kids. And I'm like, okay, I'm not necessarily a firm believer of whooping my children unless I feel like they do something that is life threatening.
Right.
If it's detrimental to your well-being, then if I whoop you, you will understand, okay, this is severe. Because I think that when we over hit or over punish correctively in that department, number one, it's not a shock, okay? And then it becomes a level of think about what they're thinking about. Okay, so it's okay to always be physical.
Right.
This is a way of this is how you're supposed to do it.
And deal with stuff, right? To get the violent fighting out in school, acting out because that's all I know.
Right. So violence, because if you think about it, it is a certain level of violence that's attached to it.
Right.
Not saying that we can't whoop our children, but if you're doing it all the time, that's the only form of redirection that you're using, then you have to think about in the child's mind what level of abuse or trauma starts to become attached to that. And then what does that do to the child parent relationship when it causes for breakdown?
Wow.
Well, I can't come to you with nothing
Right.
because I'm always going to get in trouble. I'm always going to get a whooping if I do this.
Right.
So it breaks the ability to build that healthy relationship with your children.
Right. And you said a powerful thing real quick. You said based on the levels. So it's like if
Mhm.
every time that's the punishment you get hit. Like they don't know the difference. Like, okay, this is extreme. You said in one situation in life is life threatening. Now I'm going to beat you. So you
Right.
know you don't went too far. But it's like if you know you talking or you joking when I'm telling you to be serious, and I beat you, and now I'm giving you the same punishment for everything. They can't weigh out. It makes sense right there. That's powerful.
Right. And it's just like even taking your kids to the store.
Right.
And you say, you know, they're kids. They're always gonna want something.
Right.
Doesn't matter if it's a toy or if it's candy. Think about their brain. Think about what's going on in a child's mind.
Right.
They're still learning. They're trying to, you know, be social. Their brains are just so. It's not uncommon for your child to just want to be a child.
Right.
But when you rob children of that ability to be children,
Wow.
and you want them to understand what you as an adult who's had experiences both emotionally, mentally, you know, cognitively, you're more developed because of those experiences. They haven't had that yet.
Right.
So sometimes we gotta, you know, people are in that thing where it's like, I don't want to explain things to my children. It is just what I said it is.
You have to.
And
You have to
that's
explain.
not okay.
Right.
You know, I get that we're the parent and we're the adult. And sometimes that may be appropriate.
Right.
But it's not appropriate in every case. Sometimes they really do need to understand why you're saying what it is that you're saying.
Right.
See, so when we're talking about, you know, abusers, think about an abuser who was stripped of all of that. Maybe they didn't have a mother or a father. You know, maybe they already suffered the father wound. Maybe mama was an addict, or you know, dad was an addict, or a parent is physically and mentally abusive. You know, every time you do something, it's never good enough. You know, you got to be, you couldn't get in that. You know, or I know that you're stupid, you know, or you're never going to amount to anything. They're constantly preaching the negative over your life. They're already sowing the seed. And I think that is so true because, you know, I try to look at things not just from a scientific standpoint, but I also try to look at things from a biblical standpoint. And God tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. So he's already letting you know that words are powerful.
Right.
So, you know, you taking this victim and you're stripping them of everything. And a lot of times when you're in abusive households, they may have one or two, you know, other family members that are a safety net.
Right.
But if those other two, you know, members of a family that are the safety net, how often are you able to be around that safety net and that supportive system?
Wow.
And then is that supportive system really able to be as supportive as they would like to be in that situation? Maybe they can't financially, or maybe, you know, they don't have enough time.
Right.
Right? So, you know, it impacts go all the way around. So I like to say, when you're doing something, it doesn't just affect you.
Right.
Because we rely on our families for so many different things that it has a blowback and an impact on everyone else.
Right. That makes sense.
So abusers were always victims at some point or time in another.
Right.
Because it is a learned behavior to be an abuser. This is not something that someone just wakes up tomorrow and decides to become or decides to do.
Right. Right.
I mean, I'll give you a prime example. I won't go too deep into it because, like I said, we're going to hit some other things next, you know, our next segment.
Right.
But even with pornography,
Right. Big one.
The women are looking younger and younger. What does that do to your mind?
Right.
You
Psychological.
know,
Right.
it desensitizes you to the actual age bracket of someone. And studies have talked about, you know, pedophiles. And there are a couple that have actually talked about how pornography really led them to where they are. But a lot of them were victimized themselves.
Right.
Because we know that, you know, sexual abuse is not about the act of sex itself.
Right.
It's about the act of control, being able to feel like you have the control that you didn't have when somebody did it to you. And
Right.
that's why the victimizing age is so young.
Wow.
So it's the act of control, the deviancy of the act that
Right.
actually gets them off. But it's not the act of sex itself.
Right.
But
Wow.
it's a learned behavior.
Right.
So abusers have to learn that from some place. Something had to shift in their brain
Wow.
in order for them to bypass empathy, to bypass consideration and kindness and compassion. And if you lack empathy, you're damn near borderline fall the guidelines of a psychopath, because we know that they have no emotion.
Right.
They can mimic emotion. And there are people, you know, you'll be around certain people, and I always tell people, just, if you pay attention really well, you'll be able to read people extremely well.
Right.
But I can tell when people are mimicking emotion because I've been in the field for so long.
Right.
So I can tell when you're able to mimic it versus a genuine, actual emotion that you're feeling
Wow.
that is actually towards the empathy block. And there are people that genuinely lack that. So you would have some people that are born, right? So you got people that are born maybe with autism, or we'll use autism for an example.
Okay.
They don't know how to have the empathy because their brain is hardwired different, because they actually lack the ability of understanding what social cues are.
Right.
So the further down the spectrum you go, the more severe the autism is. They can have a bond with you, but it's not going to be the same kind of bond that you would have with someone who didn't have autism.
Right.
Maybe they can communicate, but they're very limited in being able to have a conversation with you. It may be, one or two words at a time. Maybe they can say a sentence, but their brains have a different outlook. And it's actually very interesting, because when you look at an autistic brain, you can actually see on like an MRI scan that their brains don't look anything like someone who didn't have autism.
Wow.
So it's actually hardwired different. So we know that they actually do lack empathy, but they're not social in nature. They're social. That social part of their brain doesn't work like ours does. So that's a rare case though, where you would say, okay, this is someone who has this
Right.
without, ever happening to be abused to have that, but they're also not going out their way to abuse nobody either.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They're just built different in nature. The level of them abusing people is very low. They may act out behaviorally, but
Right.
because they can't really communicate what it is that they're trying to communicate in a verbal sense.
Wow. Wow. Almost like a child, almost again, back to the child.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So you have that. But abuse is learned behavior. So if you're ever in contact with someone who's abusing you, as an adult, know that is a stem of trauma somewhere. And I always tell people, look at how people communicate with their family, because family is a very clear indication of what someone's background is like.
You're getting deep now. That's real though.
No, it's like the thing, you'll hear women, people say, oh, well, he doesn't get along with his mother or his sister, or, it's just a real tumultuous. Why does he treat his mother that way? What's the story with that?
Right.
Because if a man doesn't, in nature just care about his mother, or there needs to be a reason.
Right.
Because if not, it can be an indication of how he's going to treat you.
That's the key right there. That's the key.
So what's the breakdown? And understanding the breakdown will be able to tell you more about that individual.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? And then how to navigate that.
I definitely understand. That's real.
So we go through untreated trauma. As these victims get older and they've never had any therapy, no trauma therapy. They're not learning to bounce back from that. And we like to use the resilience word, resiliency. Children have the ability to be super resilient. And I've seen kids come out of traumatic situations, get adopted, and in some cases be adopted by very loving parents that
Right.
just really want to be supportive. And they got them in every kind of therapy they can think of. They're really trying to shower this kid with love. And remember that even that can be unhealthy. So you have to have a balance with that.
Right.
Because if you give a kid everything they want, every time they want it, you're going to create a monster that's going to go into the world. And when people tell him no, him or her no, there's going to be a consequence on that end for that. And that becomes a level of abuser also. You get
That's,
what I'm saying?
I definitely understand.
That manipulation abuse is something different. And some people have took it even further than that. People have killed people because people have said no to them.
Right.
So you have to be careful. Anything, too less of something and too much of something can still create an effect that you don't want to have uh in a child that's going to one day grow up and be an adult.
Right.
And I think having children is such a it's such a big choice. I think a lot of times we don't think about it as being that big of a choice. It's like, oh, well, I'm, going to bring little people into the world. It's like, you realize what you're responsible for,
Right.
that you are really going to be the number one factor of what this child is going to see, witness. This is going to shape everything. This is where they're going to learn to cope. This is where they're going to learn to communicate. This is where they're going to learn to do all of those things. So if you're not in a healthy, sound mind and body for yourself, you dang sure can't teach somebody else how to be, of sound mind and body and have balance and harmony and be able to take that into the world. Now, I'm not saying, again, we're not saying that everybody who's a victim of something is going to grow up to be an abuser, but there is a probability that you're going to have that.
Right. I definitely understand. Definitely understand. So real quick, let me ask. So what about brothers and sisters, step brothers and sisters and stuff like that? So say like you might have a stepsister, they're in a different house, step brother, they're in a different house. Your house, no abuse going on. They may be abused, but it's like now when they get together, you have influence, especially at that age if they're young. I see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of kids mimicking each other. So like
Mm-hmm.
how let's talk about that real quick, like being around a cousin or any kid being around another kid in that environment and learning those behaviors. The kid doesn't know I'm on the path to become an abuser because I'm mimicking what's happening to me. That influence, how big is that?
That's actually a big thing. But a lot of times what'll happen is the child that's, the stepbrother or the stepsister, the one that's being abused,
Right,
will want to abuse the child that's not being abused because they resent them for having a better household. Why is yours better than mine?
right,
What did I do to deserve this? You'll see that in bullies.
right,
Maybe their father is physically abusive to them, verbally abusive to them. That verbal abuse, they need to be able to feel power somewhere, because in their home they don't feel power. They feel helpless. So when someone feels helpless, they need to be able to feel like they're in control. So you got to find somebody else that you can do that to victimize, so that you can get your power back.
right,
So that's what abuse is really about. Abuse is about, I need the power, I need the control. I need to be able to erase this victim state that I have in my mind.
right,
I don't want to acknowledge that I'm a victim. But then they try to normalize and justify the behavior. Well, if it was done to me, then it's okay for me to do it to you, because nobody showed them anything different.
wow, wow,
You know,
yeah,
and then you have cases where And seeing some. I don't know if you watched that special on Disney Plus, the Broken Heart special. But I really encourage people to watch that because it is a prime example where children get removed from the home for various things, right?
Right.
But it kind of blurs the lines a little bit. And I'm going to kind of go racial a little bit. So everybody just bear with me. I'm not, we're not.
Right.
But they're talking about, the privilege in this particular segment, and it was two women that were married and they adopted 6 children.
Right.
3 sets were siblings and the other 3 sets were siblings. But they wanted this primary, tactic. There were other things going on in their lives. I know that there was, and I wish they would divulge more about them. I haven't researched more about the women to really understand a more in depth of what it was. But we do know that the one wife was narcissistic, and she adopted those children to get recognition, and that's why they were minorities. So I'm already getting praise because I've adopted, minorities that were less fortunate. They were impoverished.
Wow.
But they also abused these children horrifically. Now, maybe their circumstances weren't any better, but it definitely wasn't that worse. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't as worse as it was when they got to where they were going.
Right. Definitely understand.
And it kind of shows that when you're dealing with CPS, they ended up taking. So I guess it was the aunt, her sister of the African American children. She was on drugs. The sister decided to take them and raise them, and her daughter let the mom in one time while she was at work. It got back to CPS. CPS came and took those children and then adopted them right out, which should have never been able to happen. So those kids should have been alive. It's a very interesting of how they were able to navigate around that. And I think that children who have been abused really needs to be more monitored as far as the system itself and how that works about removing children from a home.
Right.
And really having specific guidelines, because state to state is very different. It's not really governed by a federal thing. So this is state. Every state is different. A lot of children die in the foster care system. Why is that? A lot of them are more abused than they were when they were in the homes that they were already being abused in. So a lot of them are going from one situation to another horrific situation.
Right.
And I think that there needs to be better guidelines about who's willing to foster. And if they're not willing to, if they can't find appropriate fosters, then they need to start building, buildings where they can house these children and hire staff to ensure that these kids are getting the therapy they need. They can still attend schools.
Right.
But you're putting these children into homes, and all these people have to do is take a couple classes, get a background check.
Right.
It's not as hard to do it as people think that it is. And a lot of people do it for the extra money.
Wow.
But a lot of the abusers who become abusers have been abused multiple, it's a duration. And I think that's why the difference is that we see the resiliency between those who become abused and those who are not abusers. I think it's just very different, because I see a lot of the people that have that I have worked with that grow to be in that cycle themselves. The abuse is almost never ending for them. There isn't a let up, there isn't a break, there isn't a gap.
Right.
It's just constant abuse. So what do you do to someone who's angry, never had a chance, never had a shot, basically? I mean, what do you, you know what I'm saying? So I think I empathize with them a lot, because it's a very sad situation. So I understand why you are so why you preserve yourself that way. Because abuse is about self-preservation. I don't want to let you in.
Right.
I don't want to let you see. Because you're going to be no different than what everybody else was.
Right. Another letdown, another betrayal, another person
Right.
I thought that had my best interests is beating me up and stuff like that.
So abusers also have a tendency to self-sabotage. They already make it up in their mind what you're going to be about. And they're going to abuse you because that's the only way they know how. They don't know any other way.
Right.
So if you've never been taught love and empathy, and you've never been nurtured and really had somebody care about you, how can you display healthy emotions and vulnerability in which you've never learned to be able to do?
Right.
So if you've never learned it, how can you give it?
Right. Wow.
And a lot of times, people will want to have those conversations, and it's like, well, why? Explain it to me. I need to understand.
Right.
That's just what it is.
Right. Right.
You can't get no more. There ain't no gray area there. That is black and white.
I
Somebody
agree.
cannot give you what they themselves have never been taught or never given. And if the person is supposed to love you the most, unconditionally be there for you,
Wow.
and they're never going to be there for you, and they've never been there for you, and they've abused you, or they let other people abuse you, and they themselves have tore you down at every turn, what makes you think that you're special enough for them to give up the ghost and do right by you?
Right. Ain't gonna happen 9 times out
It
of
ain't
10.
gonna happen.
Right.
Hell will freeze over, okay? Hell will freeze over, and then you're not thinking about at what age is this adult now? How long have they been operating in this light and in this manner that it becomes so ingrained in them? What is the likelihood that they're going to want change?
Right. You speaking real. Because now that became normal. It's their norm at this point.
That's their norm. So abusers operate in the norm for them. This is how their brain works.
Wow.
Because it's been beaten repetition. They always tell us, you want to learn something, do it in repetition.
Right.
Repetition is the key to everything. Repetition is the key to studying, right?
Right. Same
You're
thing.
doing a spelling bee. You got to read the word over and over and over again. You got to say it in a sentence. You're saying it in a sentence. You're saying it. We do that as an adult. Like when my husband got me a dictionary one time, I thought this was the funniest thing, but he got me a dictionary. And this is before I went to college and did all of that. And I know you're watching Cruise, so be easy with me in the comment section below. He was like, you want to use big words. You want to use big words. It's like, yeah, I like big words, because I felt like at a younger age for myself, education was something that was big in my family.
Right.
So I always wanted to, be able to express myself and to use words and to kind of show that I was educated.
Right.
So that was important to me. And I think I had used some words in the wrong places a couple of times. And he was like, look, I'm not going to let you go out here in the world like that. You're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. So he got me a dictionary. And the goal was every week, randomly pick a word, use it in a sentence for the entire week.
Right.
I still have that dictionary.
Wow.
Yeah, I see you googly eyes. You know what I'm talking about. But I loved him for that because it showed me that it wasn't a criticism. I didn't take it as a criticism. You get what I'm saying? Something that can easily injure somebody's ego.
Right.
Right? But it was how he did it that showed, if you care about it, then I care about it. And let me invest in what you're caring about. So that was being nurturing and it was being supportive. And he was also empathizing with my desire. And I appreciated that. So I didn't take it as a criticism. But see, we're raised about criticism. You see what I'm saying? And that's something that we should want to instill in our children. You know, that's why we always got to be careful as parents too about telling your kids that they're great all the time. Look, when you do something great, that's great. And I'm going to praise you for being, you know, for doing certain things. Now, certain things I'm not going to praise you for.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. But there are things that I will praise you for.
Right.
But I never want you to have, but I never want my children to have the expectation that you're the greatest at something, because there are people out here that are going to be always a step ahead.
Right.
Maybe they want it more. Maybe they spent more time working on it than you did. So you've got to accept criticism and feedback in order to grow. Once you get that, what are you going to do with that? Because if you're never used to being able to be correctively criticized, corrective criticism, and when I say that, I mean that in love, because we're not going on our way to hurt somebody's ego, right? We're not going on our way to just purposely want to tear somebody down, but we want to redirect them. We want them to have some humbleness about them. We want them to be able to understand, you know, and be able to have room for growth. But if you tell your kids they're great all the dang on time,
you're setting them up for it. Setting them up for a fight.
What happens when they get out there in the world and then they go to do this very thing and someone says, well, it ain't that great. Ain't nothing special about it to me.
Right.
You could have fixed it and did this. You could have did that. You could have, you know what I'm saying?
You know, crushed their world now. It's like their whole world, because they trusted the parent. They said, the parent told me I'm great. I'm great. And the other kid's like, nah, you just like everybody else. And you actually can learn some stuff to get better.
You can, and that's the thing. Never, you know, and I'm willing to take criticism. Sometimes I don't like it. Right. Sometimes I don't like it. I've had criticism where I'm like, okay, I know for a fact now you're just wrong. You know, like, okay, you're picking out certain things and it ain't going all together. Right. You know, and I might get a little flustered about that. But there are times where criticism was needed and I was able to take that. And as much as nobody likes it, you got to be able to dig deep enough to be like, okay, I'm glad somebody told me that, because that means that they see that I have potential, right? But they're encouraging me to do something to get better.
Right. In love. They're doing it in love. Like, I'm doing it because I love you and I want to see you win. It's a big difference. Right. Now,
I think there's a tone and a place, you know, because sometimes people can say things and you be like, okay, now wait a minute, because who you talking to? No, you know what I'm saying? Like, lower your tone, say lower your tone, get the bass out your voice, okay, to have a conversation. Right. So I think that the approach is everything too.
Right. Okay.
But that's why balance is so important. And parenting is the hardest thing that we can do on the planet. Right. Yeah, you can go buy a book. Yeah, you can read a manual. But that's somebody else's perception of the manual. So I would like to tell people, if you're going to read books, really read them critically. Really try to digest them, what they're saying, and then really kind of like play with that about how that works for you in your household. You may not be able to do it this exact way. You may need to do it and tweak it a little bit and then do it this way.
Right.
But consistency is everything too.
Consistency.
Abusers don't know a whole lot about consistency. Or the consistency was that they were consistently abused.
Wow.
Maybe the abuse was the only thing that was consistent in their lives. Maybe all the good things, the warm, the loving aspects were very sporadic. Right. I'm sitting outside, so my wind's blowing, and I know I'm kind of shaking over here a little bit.
You're fine. You get that. But you just said another key thing right there. It's like they going through it, so it becomes their norm, but it's like they actually want to make somebody else feel that, because like, this is how I felt. So now I want to make you feel that way, or they feel in a way, and it's like nobody understands.
Yeah. A lot of times they don't think that anybody understands, because perception is everything, right?
Right.
So we have a weird sense of how we judge people. if they look like they're well together, or they live in a nice home, or they drive a nice car, oh, they gotta have it together. You don't know what going on behind them closed doors. That man could be beating the mess out of his wife. Yeah, he bought her a nice car, but he beating the brakes off her.
Right.
Maybe he's sexually assaulting her.
Right.
Maybe he's verbally abusing her.
Behind
You just never know. And it could be vice versa.
right.
You know, a lot of times, you know, people don't think that women are abusers, and women can be very strong abusers. We talked about that when we talked about the emasculation of Black men.
Right. No, that's a fact.
When we were talking to our Black women in that segment.
Right.
Whether or not, you know, religious Rhonda, you know, and our independent Irene,
right.
You know, if they don't think that they're abusing people, they're verbally abusive.
Right.
They're verbally abusive because of status, because of what they want, what you don't have.
Right.
So even as an adult, you know, we can abuse and victimize, you know, again, but let's say somebody who hasn't been, and this is kind of the tricky thing, because we'll kind of back up a little bit. A lot of times we like to say people don't end up in relationships with people that are, you know, unhealthy unless we're unhealthy ourselves, right?
Right.
That's true statement for long term, because at some point we know the mask comes off. Now you've probably been roped in, hook, line, and sinker at this point. But a lot of times, even an abuser will wear a mask.
Right.
But there's subtle things that happen that people don't pay attention to with abusers.
Right.
Because see, abusers always want to isolate you. They need to isolate you in order to abuse you. Just like for a woman who may have children and she marries a pedophile, doesn't know he's a pedophile. He's going to want to isolate some interaction after a while. Because in order for him to abuse these kids, their support system needs to drop. Wow. You get what I'm saying? Let me get you out of here. Let me move you away from grandparents. Let me get you up out of here.
Right.
So when I start doing this, I can have a little bit more control over your mother, but then I can go ahead and start victimizing and abusing these kids the way I want to. Wow. But abusers always want to isolate you.
Right.
They don't want you to be around family and friends. They don't want you to have that support system. Right. Because that support system, they're going to be able to see things because they're from the outside looking in, especially when you spend a lot of time. You know what I'm saying? You spend a lot of time with your family and stuff. They're going to see things. Right. They're going to know.
They're in our business. They're too much in our business. We need to keep them out of our business. They're doing too much.
They're doing too much.
Right.
They know too much. I can't abuse you like I want to.
Right. Whew. You're kicking it real right there. And that's
abuse. And it don't matter. And look, it could be a boyfriend who's very extremely jealous. Right. Jealousy is a level of someone that's going to abuse you.
Wow. And that's real right there. And that you said a lot today, right? We're going to do a 2-part.
Yes.
Depending on the feedback on this one right here. We're talking about victim to abuser, right? We're talking about how it starts in the beginning, right? Even as parents now, signs to watch for, the way we treat our kids and stuff like that, because they don't have a voice. They're watching us. So if you may be in a relationship, you're getting abused. Now it trickles down to the kid, or you may just this is how I was raised. Back in the day, you know, back then we didn't know we had problems. We thinking like that's just the way grandpa was like that, grandmother was like that, auntie, uncles, everybody in our family was like that.
And you think everybody else is like that till you realize that they're not like that. Then you start to question, well, why me?
Why me?
So abusers really do go through some very interesting mental steps.
Right.
It's almost like the 5 stages of grief, just with 5 stages of abuse. Wow. Once they get to acceptance that this is happening,
and then coming back and then turning back at that point.
And so our next segment, though, I know we were short today, but our next segment we'll kind of redo an overview in the beginning, and then I'll break down different types of abusers and give some really good examples to those types so that we can kind of attach that to something.
Right.
And then, we'll go over again warning signs, just, so that people can say, hey, do I know somebody like that? Because if you do know somebody that's in an abusive situation, you want to do everything that you can to try to, encourage them. And there's only so much that you can do because they have to be ready to leave a situation.
Right.
As an adult. But if it's children and things like that, we want to make sure that we give you the right tips on what to do, how to be able to help, because nobody should be anybody's victim.
That's a fact right there. And that's real right there. Red flags to look for. Children signs like that, whether it's a grown up or child, it could be abused. So it's like we definitely want to touch on that because there's so many different avenues of abuse.
Yes.
And it's like, so definitely the overview today was wonderful. And we talked about a lot of good stuff right here. Will we be back in 2 weeks or how we doing it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be back in 2 weeks from today with part 2. And then we're gonna go after that into the relationship. So in the meantime, if you have questions, be sure to either send them to me or send them to Natalie. We'll be able to address them on the show. And I'm definitely looking forward to next week's show. I mean, not next week, in 2 weeks show. So we can get into that. And then after that, we start the relationships, right?
Yes.
Wow.
We're going to go into the relationship series for all y'all relationshipers out there that have really enjoyed the different levels that we did. I know we've talked about relationships sporadically, sprinkling them through and through. But I think to give you guys a series really just solely about relationships, I'm really excited to do that for you guys. I think we're both really excited to bring that to you guys, since it seems to be the thing right now that everybody wants to talk about. So, don't get too mad at us when we start that series, though. Okay, I need you.
They're gonna disqualify me because I'm single, so they can be he ain't giving no advice. So I'm gonna be learning as well. I'm gonna be learning on the show as well because how you gonna give tell somebody how to be together? You single. So, I'm gonna play my part. I'm gonna learn with the crowd on this one, and I'll chime in if I do have some wisdom because I've been in enough relationships, but I'm trying to do it right this time right here. I want to make sure I'm healthy and whole and good when I'm stepping in so I can have my foundation the right way this time.
That's right. I'm excited about it. I'm always excited to be here. I'm always excited to give information. But I think what's going to be unique about our relationship series is that we have talked about trauma so much. So what's cool is that when we talk about these things, you'll see me be able to sprinkle in some of the things. If you followed the trauma series, you'll see me sprinkle in certain things that we've kind of talked about on the show. I won't go as heavy into it in the relationship aspect, maybe as I did in the trauma series, but I will drop sprinkles, to really kind of get you guys really, just get everything flowing and moving. And so I'm just really excited about the relationship series. I'm just excited about it, period. I think it's going to be amazing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and that's definitely dope right there, and definitely needed right there. We talk about healthy relationships, right? We talk about coming out of the traumas, getting ourselves together, and if you're in a relationship, how to continue growing a healthy relationship. So that's definitely gonna be dope right there. And it all goes hand in hand because like you don't want these tendencies we're talking about now to start showing up in the relationship part because that's a bad thing. So we want to make sure we got ourselves together dealing with the trauma now. Keeping the traumas out so that we can have a healthy relationship. We can have healthy children. We can have a healthy family as a whole.
Yes.
So that's definitely important and definitely needed right there. It's like because in the world we're living in now, it's like everything is so desensitized now. It's like everything is like, oh, that's the norm, and it's not the norm. The norm that they try to paint is really not the norm. So I'm definitely looking forward to that as well. So at this point, we're gonna do the final thoughts with Natalie Collier, and we're gonna wrap it up. We thank everybody for watching. This is the Proof in the Pudding podcast show. The trauma series. I go by Sion, and this is the final thought. We're talking about from victim to abuser.
Yes. So please tune in This is the biggest thing that I can say is just really please tune in for our next segment. It's really gonna get good. It's really gonna get good because, like I said, we're gonna break down different types of abusers, giving examples so that you can actually tangibly put that to something. And then we're going to talk more about signs, what to do if you're dealing with an abuser, and what to do if we notice in the children. Because once I give you signs and symptoms, you're going to be able to start identifying things. And we want to make sure that we get you to the right place so that you can get some help if it's happening to you, get some help if it's happening to a child, and, we'll talk about what we can do with the abuser also. And that's going to be depending on age appropriateness for them. Again, like I said, because the older we get, the likelihood with change becomes harder and harder to do.
Right.
And when you're dealing with someone who's an abuser, they're hardwired very, very differently than people who are not that traumatized.
Right.
So we'll talk more about that. And I'm just really excited about doing it. And I hope that you guys are really going to learn something from the segments that we've done. If you haven't caught all the shows, look, every show may not be for you, but definitely just scroll through and take a little peek and see what we talked about that maybe is interesting for you and something that you would like to, share. I'm all about sharing, share the videos and, just spread the word, because it's all about helping each other. We're in such a weird state in society now as it is. And I think a lot of us are starting to see that there's a lot of things that are very unhealthy about the world around us. And I think that we're more open in understanding about wanting to understand.
Right.
How can we be a part of the solutions instead of being a part of the problems?
And that's real right there. And that's definitely a good spot to end it right there. We definitely appreciate everybody for watching. Be sure to go back and check out the first trauma series if you haven't seen them, part 1 through 7. This was episode 8, so you'll be caught up to speed for the next show. And we thank everybody again. This is the Proof in the Pudding podcast show, and we love y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Hold on.